Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. We're so glad you could join us today for a discussion that hits right at the heart of one of the biggest challenges businesses face, moving from firefighting to forecasting and supply chain planning. Today's topic is all about transforming how clean ERP and supply chain decision-making can empower organizations to shift from reactive problem solving to proactive planning, a transition that's not just a goal, but a necessity in today's fast-moving market. I am honored to introduce our speakers, two leaders who bring both strategic vision and practical experience to this conversation. First, we have Cheryl Jeffrey, CEO of Lace Consulting Group, whose deep expertise in supply chain strategy has helped companies rethink planning processes and drive meaningful change. Joining her is Sachin Sangle, VP of Engineering here at ImpactQA, who combines technical leadership with the passion for delivering solutions that improve planning accuracy and business outcomes. Today, we'll explore why planning remains a pain point for many organizations and what practical steps you can take now to make planning more predictive, collaborative, and effective. So let's dive in. Cheryl, Sachin, thank you for being here, and you may take it away.
Thank you so much, Gabby. Thank you so much for that quick introduction. Before we dive into today's topic, I want to take a quick moment to introduce ImpactQA, the organization I represent. ImpactQA is a global software testing and quality assurance company with over a decade of experience supporting clients across the world. We specialize in niche testing services that helps organizations to improve release quality and reliability through automation or AI-driven testing solutions, performance engineering, and comprehensive quality engineering practices. We ensure business assurance, not just the quality assurance. Now, while ImpactQA's core expertise is in testing and quality assurance, today we are not here to talk about testing services or promote our offerings. Instead, we are here to explore the real issues that cause planning breakdowns in ERP environments, the gaps between operational reality and system assumptions, and how to design planning logic and validation practices that actually hold up in the real world. So let's get started with that. Over to you, Cheryl.
Well, thank you, Sachin. I appreciate the introduction. So my name is Cheryl Jeffrey. I am the CEO and the principal consultant for Lace Consulting Group. We are a company that specializes in ERP, business operations, and process improvement. So we work with clients who either have poor implementations with their ERP system or their business processes and operations do not align with their ERP system. We also do implementations of several different ERP systems. And we are strong and overall looking at not only the ERP system and the IT systems that you have, but what your business practices are. We work with a lot of our clients to help with them, especially in the supply chain and planning parameters, which we find is to be one of the most, probably the most problematic of all of the ERP system modules that you have is the planning. So thank you, and I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. This is something right up my alley.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Before we get into the tools, testing cycles, or planning workflows, I want to ground us all in something that's true across every ERP system. Whether you're running SAP, Oracle, Infor, Odoo, Epicor, or whatever homegrown systems, most organizations don't fail at the planning because they lack technology. Now, they fail because their ERP data, their planning parameters, and the validation processes are not trusted. And that's the part nobody likes to say out loud. Across industries, and I've worked with many of them, I see supply chain teams firefighting. Not because people don't care, not because planners are not talented, because I've worked with very many talented planners, and not because leadership isn't invested, but because the assumptions inside the ERP were never tested. We inherit parameters from legacy systems. We copy settings from one SKU to another because it's fast. We trust historical data that's incomplete, inconsistent, or distorted by one-off events. And then we're surprised when planning outputs don't match operational reality. And that's the uncomfortable truth. If the assumption inside your ERP are wrong, every plan built on top of them will be wrong, no matter how good your planners are and no matter what tool you layer on top. And it's not an SAP problem, like I mentioned, nor Oracle, nor Dynamics, or any other ERP system out there. It's a planning governance problem. Every ERP system is only as strong as the logic, the parameters, and the data you feed it. So as you feed that beast, that information is going in there. Everybody is using it. Let me give you a simple example. If you planned delivery times don't reflect what your suppliers are actually doing, then that's a problem. If your production lead times don't reflect what the shop floor actually is experiencing, well, that's a problem. If your safety stock logic is inherited instead of designed, then your ERP is planning a world that doesn't exist. And when the system plans a world that doesn't exist, planners compensate, they override, they build shadow spreadsheets, they create tribal knowledge that never makes it back into the ERP system. It just sits up in their head and it's not put in the system. And suddenly the ERP becomes a system of record, not the system of planning. That's the gap we're here to talk about today. Because whether you're implementing a new ERP system, upgrading an existing one, or trying to stabilize the planning performances, the real question is this: are you planning decisions trusted, testable, scalable inside your ERP? Or are they dependent on workarounds and heroic movements? Are you planning decisions trusted and testable? I don't know, but today, Sachin and I are going to bridge those two worlds. The planning reality that supply chain teams live in every day, and the testing and validation reality that ERP programs rely on. And our goal is simple: to help you see where planning breaks, why it breaks, and how to design planning logic that actually holds up, not just in theory, but in real world operations. So with that, let's jump into the first topic. I'll turn it over to you, Sachin.
Okay. So what actually breaks first in manufacturing planning and why it happens across every ERP platform? So Cheryl, you just talked about planning breaking quietly at the foundation, right? When we took the complex manufacturing environment, there are several candidates that could be at fault. From what you have seen in real programs, what typically breaks first? Is it material master data? Is it BOM accuracy, or is SKU segmentation logic?
Well, that's a great place to start because in manufacturing, planning doesn't break in one big dramatic movement. It breaks quietly in the foundational elements that nobody ever revisits. And the first thing to break is almost always, in my opinion, material master data. Not because people don't care, but because material masters are inherited. They're copied forward from other products, other plants, older systems, and they want to try to copy a lot of the older systems that they had and bring it into the new ERP system. And when something in the ERP tends to live there forever, even if the business has changed dramatically, it'll just stay the same. I always say that there's a theory called set it and forget it. This is what happens. The second thing that breaks in BOM accuracy is engineering changes don't always flow cleanly into the ERP system. Scrap factors drift, alternate components get used on the shop floor but never updated in the system. Over time, the BOM and the ERP become historical artifacts, not a reflection of how the product is actually built. I've seen BOMs take down companies so fast, putting in ones and zeros in a system and trying to use alternate BOM components. That doesn't work. And in the third area, the one that causes the most downstream chaos, is SKU segmentation logic. I see it regularly. Companies create new SKUs constantly. New sizes, new colors, new packaging, new customer variances. But instead of designing planning parameters intentionally, they copy them from the closest existing SKU that they think is the closest one. So they end up with a higher variability of SKUs using the same planning logic as the stable, predictable one, or long lead times using the same safety stock rules as short cycle. That's when planning outputs start to drift away from reality. That's a problem.
That's great. That's great, Sherry. It's good to know. And you really touched on some interesting topics. Now, you mentioned how often parameters are inherited instead of designed. As organizations introduce more and more SKUs, new variants, packaging, and customer specific versions, planning complexity increases fast. We have seen these challenges in our testing world. It's continuously changing the data. Now, from your experience, how do companies struggle with SKU proliferation, growth, but planning parameters are simply copied rather than intentionally designed?
Yeah, I mean that's a big thing, right? SKU proliferation is one of the biggest silent killers of planning accuracy. I've seen companies that, they put in Smith and it's with a smaller S and they have a dot after it. So every new SKU can add complexity, but the planning logic really involves with it. So what happens? Parameters get cloned, lead times get cloned, safety stock logics get cloned, and suddenly you have hundreds of thousands of SKUs running on assumptions that were never validated for them. They create three major problems if you think about it. Inventory imbalance. You end up with too much of the wrong item, not enough of the right one, because the system is planning based on someone else's behavior or another part, for example's behavior. Capacity distortion is another one. If routing times or production lead times are copied from different product family, the ERP will schedule work centers in the way that they don't match real capacity. And finally, firefighting becomes a norm. And I've seen planners that are proud of how they override the ERP system with their own knowledge and documents and their own spreadsheets. So planners spend their days overriding the system's recommendations because the system is a planning world that doesn't exist. So they find other ways around it in order to make sure that they keep manufacturing running.
Very well said, Cheryl. And I have seen this in multiple clients where I've worked in supply chain industry. Now, there's one theme that keeps coming up is inherited logic versus intentional design, right? Now, in reality, your planners are under pressure to move fast. They have continuous pressure to keep business running. They need to move fast. From what you actually see on the ground, how often are planning parameters actively reviewed versus simply inherited over the time, as you mentioned?
So honestly, in most organizations, planning parameters are reviewed for less often than people think. Like I mentioned earlier, they set it and forget it. They go in at the time of either implementation or some sort of issue and they look at it. They don't have them embedded in their systems. So here's the reality. Lead times are updated only when something breaks. Safety stock formulas are really revisited after go live. And in fact, I can say that with all of the planning parameters, they really go back and look at it after go live. Lot sizing rules are copied from legacy systems and never challenged. Make to stock and make to order indicators are set once and then forgotten. And I don't even want to talk about reorder points. Those are often based on demand patterns from years ago. So planners end up compensating manually, as I mentioned, over and over. They use their own spreadsheets. They look in emails. They use tribal knowledge. Why is one of the best planners out there if they know their parts on the floor and they know how they work through the floor? The system may not say it, but they know it because they're on the floor every day. But because the ERP is running on assumptions that no longer match the business, and this is where the pain shows up across manufacturing. I've seen it all the time, like you have, Sachin, right? We've lived this, we see this. Production schedules don't reflect real cycle times. Procurement chases suppliers because planned delivery times are wrong. Inventory swings between excess and shortage, and that can be daily. Customer service gets caught in the middle, which, let me tell you, as a VP of operation, I think she had the red hotline to my office every day because they get caught in the middle of being able to ship and not ship. Leadership loses confidence in the plan, and all because the fundamental planning setups. These parameters that drive everything were inherited instead of intentionally designed. That's why this conversation really matters, Sasha. You and I have to get out there and tell them, because if the planning logic isn't right, nothing downstream will be right, no matter what ERP you're running.
100% aligned, Cheryl. And I do follow this in my real life. I do challenge business on the existing set rules, parameters, business logics, and I do challenge whether those are being reviewed continuously. Now, coming back to the lead times are one of those parameters everyone relies on. Okay, but very few people question those lead times. As I was explaining that I do challenge those, but there are very few people really question those lead times. Based on your experience working closely with manufacturing teams, how accurate are ERP lead times compared to what really happens on the shop floor?
And what I'm about to say probably doesn't surprise you, Sasha, and probably not a few people that will be listening. But lead times inside an ERP are almost never accurate, as people assume.
Right.
And the gap between what the system believes and what actually happens on the shop floor is one of the biggest hidden drivers of planning pain. Can see it all the time. In the most organizations, right, ERP lead times are aspirational. They reflect what should happen, in fantasy land, not what does happen. Here's why. They often set during go live and never revisited. Again, the same theme that I'm saying over and over again. When I ran my company, we had quarterly, we had annual reviews of our ERP systems, our setups. We embedded in our ISO documents. We embedded in all of our requirements. So it became a living item for us. Most of it they copy from similar items without validating whether the process is actually similar. So if I'm going to go in, I'm just going to copy the same part, but I'm not going to go and look down into the planning parameters and determine if that's the right one. They don't account for real world variability. Being a manufacturing person and an engineer for so long, machine downtime, labor constraints, changeovers, supplier inconsistency, quality holds, those all impact it. So the ERP ends up planning a perfectly linear, perfectly predictable world, while the shop floor is dealing with variabilities, bottlenecks, and exceptions almost every single day. And I would even say almost every single hour. And when that mismatch grows, you see the symptoms immediately. Production orders become late, right? They get started late. They can't hit the delivery dates. And then you've got this backlog. Procurement chases suppliers because the system assumed a lead time that hasn't been true. So now they're expediters versus strategic buyers. And then you've got these inventory swings between excess and shortage. So no wonder why your planners are all trying to figure out their own codes, because the swings are so bad. And customer service, as I mentioned before, they're caught in the middle. What are they supposed to tell their customers? They come to the meetings and they beg for parts, but manufacturing doesn't have the parts to make it. Then they push the dates out, and then they start to chase components. And lastly, planners stop trusting the system. And again, they start building their own shadow logic. And as a master planner for 15 years, if my ERP system wasn't working, by darn it, I did create my own Excels because I needed to get parts on the floor. The truth is, ERP lead times are only accurate when they're actively governed. And most companies, they're not. They're inherited, they're outdated, they're optimistic, and they really are tested against an actual cycle times or supplier performance. Supplier performance is a big thing. You should be managing those on-time deliveries with your suppliers and then adjusting your lead times accordingly. So when people ask why planning outputs don't match operational reality, this is usually the first place I look, because if the lead times are wrong, everything downstream, MRP, capacity, planning, safety stocks, production, sequencing, it will all be wrong too. That's why lead time governance is a technical exercise. It's a planning credibility exercise, which I think you know what I'm talking about, Sasha, when we talk about this.
100% spot on. And thank you so much for sharing in detail. And I really making note of all these points. Now let's little bit deep dive into it. There are some interesting questions I get based on this discussion or whatever points you have mentioned just now, right? When planner realize the system doesn't reflect reality, they often compensate outside the ERP just to keep operations running, right? From a planning and governance standpoint, what actually happens when planners start overriding lead times informally outside the system?
Well, your planners work a lot of hours, that's for darn sure. Where I had a planner that thought she was the greatest planner and she was working Saturdays and Sundays. So I see them out there doing what they got to do. But when planners override lead times informally in spreadsheets, emails, on sticky notes, right? Or just literally sitting in their head, the entire planning process becomes disconnected from the ERP. And once that happens, the organization loses the very thing an ERP system is supposed to do. It is the single source of truth. That is where you get your source of truth. If the ERP stops being the system of planning, the system may say a supplier delivers in 20 days, but the planner knows it's really 35. So the planner adjusts manually. They pad dates.
Got it.
They shift orders. They build their own logic outside the system. And their ERP becomes a system of record, not the system of reality. And I think the more importantly, especially in the manufacturing companies that I work with, planners have been there for years. Some of them even came off the floor because why? They're good at knowing their parts. So they become supposedly good planners. So tribal knowledge replaces governed logic. Lead times become something only certain planners know. If that person is out sick, on vacation, or leaves the company, the knowledge goes with them. And I've seen that time after time. There's no audit trail, no visibility, and zero governance. So upstream and downstream teams make decisions based on fiction. Procurement thinks suppliers are on time because the ERP says they are. Production thinks they have more time than they actually do. Customer service promises dates based on parameters that haven't even been in true for years. And everyone is planning based on the system, except the people who actually know the truth. Firefighting becomes the operational model because the ERP is planning a world that doesn't exist. Planners spend their days correcting it. They expedite, they reschedule, they override, they chase suppliers, they manually adjust every production order. And none of that behavior is visible to leadership. They maintain it in their little black box. Continuous improvement becomes impossible. You can't improve what you can't see. So if you're trying to do Kaizen events and process improvement flows, if your ERP says lead times are fine, but the planners are quietly compensating the organization, never will see the root cause. So the same problem repeats every cycle. So how do you fix it? You can't. And then testing and validation, which is an area that is probably something that you and I could talk about for hours. Testing and validation break down. This is the part most organizations miss. When planners override outside the system, testing becomes meaningless. Test cases validate the ERP behavior, not the planning's behavior. So the system passes UAT, but guess what? It feels real life. It doesn't match. In worst cases, I've even seen planners not even involved in any of the upfront discussions of what the ERP system should and shouldn't have. Bottom line is this. When planners override lead times outside the ERP system, the organization loses visibility and then they lose control. And then what happens? They lose trust in the plan. It's not just a data issue. It's a planning credibility issue. And until those lead times are brought back in the system, governed and tested, the ERP will continue planning a world that doesn't match operational reality. So it just doesn't work.
Agree, completely agree. And I have seen this in some of my recent UAT, right? We have seen the challenge that our test cases have passed, but in real life, when we go live, the planning parameters or the operational times are not really matching there. So what we are doing in our testing world is we are getting involved with business users way early in stages, capturing the real times from them or capturing real business processes from them. Now, this is something I see confuse a lot of program teams again. But the system behaves exactly as configured, yet the business struggles. Now, from your perspective, how dangerous is it when planning parameters are technically correct but operationally wrong?
It's far more dangerous than most people think, right? More companies don't realize it because when planning parameters are technically correct, they're all set up the way that everybody thinks, but the people, the operational team, it's not working right. And the operational part is wrong. The system behaves perfectly, Sachin. Why the business quietly falls apart? So let me explain what I mean. ERP systems don't plan based on reality. They plan based on assumptions, right? They have to have lead times, safety stock rules, lot size, bombs, routings. You feed it into it. Like I always say, you feed the beast. If those assumptions are wrong, the system will still run flawlessly. It will
Yeah.
generate planning orders, it'll create purchase requisitions, and they'll create production schedule exactly as it's
Mhm.
designed. But it will be planning a world that doesn't exist. You get outputs that look right before behavior is wrong. The plan is clean. The MRP runs finishing with no errors. Love it. Woohoo, got no errors. The date lines up neatly. Everything looks green on my dashboard. But the shop floor, it can't execute it. Suppliers can't meet it. Capacity can't support it. And inventory can't sustain it. The plan is technically correct, but the operational part is useless. So the organization loses trust in the system. And that's what I see time and time again. Lace is pulled in to many of poor implementations. And when you get down to the root cause of it, the organization stopped trusting the system and created their own workarounds. Every department. So planners stop relying on ERP recommendations. Production supervisors start trusting the schedule. Procurement starts working off of email threads instead of planned dates. And customer service stops coding based on system availability and they make up their own dates. Once trust is gone, the ER becomes a reporting tool, not a planning tool. Firefighting becomes the default operational model because the system is planning based off of incorrect assumptions. Every day becomes a reaction. Expedite this, push that, split this order, override that date, call the supplier, rebuild the schedule. And none of this behavior is visible in the ERP system. And then leadership gets a false sense of security. This is the most dangerous part. So as I moved up in my chain from going from a material planner to a director of operations to a VP, I was always in my ERP system and validating and verifying and bringing data to reality. This is the most where executives see clean reports, stable KPIs, and a system that appears to be functioning. And in most cases, a lot of executives don't even go into the ERP system at all. They just count on somebody running reports for them. But meanwhile, planners are drowning in manual corrections. The system says everything is fine. The business knows everything is not fine. So testing and continuous improvement breaks down. And when parameters are wrong, testing becomes meaningless. A user acceptance test validates the system's logic, not the business reality. So the system passes the test, but it fails in production. So continuous improvement becomes impossible because the root cause is invisible. So the bottom line, Sachin, right? Technically correct, but operational wrong parameters are by far the most dangerous kind because they hide the problem. They create illusion of control when eroding planning credibility, operational stability, and cross-functional trust. And until those parameters are aligned with the real world behavior, the ERP will continue generating plans that look good on paper, but fail miserably in practice.
Rightly said. That's rightly said, Cheryl. So I do see a value, or I do see a importance of involving planners in the early adoption of your program object, your conception itself, getting them involved in initial stages of your program planning, why it is important. And you rightly pinpointed all those behaviors, how program fails at the end when it is not right in the operational level. Thank you so much for that, Cheryl. Now let's talk about your demand planning tools, right? Now, many organizations invest heavily in demand planning tools and models. Yet, adoption, I have seen that adoption remains really low.
Yeah.
So I want to understand from your experience working with business users, why do so many demand planning model fails to gain the trust, even when the math looks sound?
Yeah, I'm with you there. So demand planning models don't fail because the math is wrong, right? 1 + 1 = 2. They fail because the business doesn't trust how the model behaves. And trust isn't lost in one moment. It erodes over a period of time, very slowly, for very predictable reasons. As I mentioned again before, the model is a black box. Most business users don't understand how the model reacts to promotions, seasonality, outliers, or missing data. So when the forecast changes, they can't explain why it changed. If people can't explain the behavior, they won't trust the output. I've heard a lot. I don't know why that data is there. I don't know how that happened. I'm not sure of that information. If people can't explain the behavior, right? One more time, they won't trust the output. Historical data is messy, and the model inherits the mess. Garbage in, garbage stays. Demand history is full of noise. Stockouts, substitution, returns, overtime, events that take place, manual overrides, bad transactions is a big one. And if that data isn't clean or flagged, the model learns the wrong patterns. And when the model learns the wrong patterns, the forecast becomes unpredictable. And this is going to be more and more important as people want to move to AI, right? If bad data continues to build up, AI is going to just do what it's supposed to do by predicting bad data. So what happens? Override happens without governance, right? Sanjay, planners override forecast all the time.
Right.
They do it for great reasons. They're not just changing their planning forecast, but without rules, thresholds, documentation, standard work, override becomes tribal knowledge. The model says one thing, the planner says another. Leadership doesn't know which one to believe. So forecast accuracy becomes a number, not a behavior. Most organizations measure accuracy, but they don't measure why the forecast went wrong, Sachin, right? What behavior caused the error, whether the model behaved as unexpected, and whether overrides helped or hurt, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so accuracy becomes a scoreboard, not a learning tool. The model is technically correct, if you think about it, but operationally irrelevant. And these are the silent killers. A model can be statistically sound and still fail the business. Why? Because it doesn't understand product life cycle. It doesn't react fast enough to volatility. It overreacts to noise and underreacts to real shifts. And it doesn't align with how the business is actually selling and producing. When the model's behavior doesn't match how the business experienced demand, trust collapse. UAT doesn't validate forecast behavior. And this is where ERP and planning systems completely fall apart. So with that, right, Sachin, forecasting is really tested with clear acceptance criteria. For this pattern, the model should behave like this. For this expectation, the model should respond like that. But instead, UAT becomes opinion-based. I don't like that number. This feels too high. This doesn't look right. Without behavioral test cases, trust becomes subjective. And the bottom line is this: demand planning models fail not because they are weak, but because they're untrusted. And they're untrusted because the logic behind them isn't visible, explainable, governed, or validated in a way business users can believe in it and trust it. And when the model behavior becomes transparent, predictable, and testable, that's when trust starts to be built.
Rightly said, Cheryl. So that's when I see what is the importance of your writing, getting a clear, concise user acceptance criteria and documenting those. Because based on those, you define your test cases and logics, your positive and negative scenarios are around it. So having those acceptance criteria, as you rightly mentioned, right, is very important in this entire program. Now, there's always a debate about whether forecasting problems stem from bad data or weak processes. Now, if I step a look back and look across organizations, right, is forecast accuracy more of a data problem or it's a process problem?
So depends, right? Could be the chicken or the egg in some cases, right? But it's attempting to pick one, data or process. But here's my truth, is that the forecast accuracy breaks down when both are weak, right? And most organizations underestimate how tightly the two are really connected. Okay, let me see if I can break this down to you guys. So forecast accuracy is a data problem when the history is wrong. So demand history is the foundation of every statistical model. If the history is distorted, the forecast will be too. So common issues, right? Stockouts recorded at zero demand, substitutions not captured properly, returns mixed into that normal demand, one-time events treated as repeatable patterns, and promotions are not flagged, manual overrides baked into the history, and bad transactions that never get cleaned up. Let me repeat that. Bad transactions that never get cleaned up. Open sales orders, open POs, open MOs, all of that really can mess up your data. And when the data is messy, the model learns the wrong story. And when the model learns the wrong story, the forecast becomes unpredictable. Forecast accuracy is a problem, a process problem, when behavior is inconsistent, right? So even with perfect data, the forecast will fail if the planning process is weak. Typical process failures may include, like I said, a lot of those overrides. And there's no governance around what those overrides are. Sales team will change the delivery date, planning will change the planning dates. All of these have no rules behind it. When no rules for when it's trust the model versus when to intervene. There's no alignment between the sales, supply chain, and finance. There's no accountability for forecast input and no structured review of any type of that forecast expectation. Yeah, some people say we try to do good forecasting and planning. At the end of the day, I haven't sat in a really strong forecasting planning when ERP data is bad. In other words, the model can be statistically sound, but the process around it is completely chaotic. So the real issue is the interaction between the two of them. Here's the part most organizations miss. Bad data creates bad forecast. Duh. Bad processes create bad behavior. And together, they destroy trust. You can have the cleanest data in the world, guys, but if the overrides are uncontrolled, accuracy will collapse. You can have the most disciplined processes, but if the data is polluted, the model will never stabilize. And forecast accuracy is not, I repeat, it's not a math problem. It is truly a credibility problem. And the organization that wins treat forecasting as a system and not a number. The best performing companies that I've seen, anyways, in my business, do three things consistently. And this is what I preach. They clean and classify historical data before feeding it into the model. They define clear rules, complete rules around overriding exceptions and who owns that data. And they test the model's behavior, not just the output. So when the data is clean and the process is disciplined, accuracy becomes a byproduct and certainly not a struggle. So like this, bottom line, right? Forecast accuracy fails when data and process drift apart. It succeeds when both are governed, and I mean managed, right? Transparent, so everybody can see it, and tested and validated. Right, Sachin?
Sorry, it looks like I was talking on mute. So yeah,
That's
yeah.
okay.
So
I was wondering what happened to you.
yeah, I was talking on mute and I did ask my question. So I'll need Gabby's
Can
help
you
here.
repeat?
Yes. So thank you so much. You perfectly nailed down to three key points which you mentioned, and I'll dig down into your first key point which you nailed down, which was clean, classify historical data, right? And you have also emphasized on trust and explainability throughout this conversation. Now let's dig down into the historical data cleanliness. Digging into the foundation of most planning logic, what role does historical data cleanliness really play in overall planning credibility?
So good question, right? And this conversation comes up a lot with my clients. Historical data cleanliness is one of the most underestimated drivers of planning credibility, right? It doesn't matter what ERP you're running or what forecasting tools you use. If the history is wrong, every planning decision built on top of it becomes unstable, right? So let me explain why this matters so much, right? Historical data is the foundation of every planning model. Forecasting, safety stock calculations, segmentation logic, seasonally detections, all of it depends on clean, accurate history. If the history is distorted, the model learns the wrong patterns. And when the model learns the wrong patterns, the business stops trusting the output. So dirty history creates false signals, right? I always say most organizations don't realize how much noise is buried in their demand history. Stock out records, stock out recorded at zero demand, substitutions that are not captured, mixed and returns into that normal demand. So I'm getting returns coming back. I've got my regular demand. One-time events become something that they look as repeatable when in fact it was a one-time event. Promotions are not flagged. I repeat this over and over. Manual overrides baked into the data and bad transactions that never get cleaned up or fixed. When this noise flows into the model, it creates volatility that isn't real. And planners end up chasing ghosts. So clean history makes model behavior predictable. Business users don't need a perfect forecast. They need a forecast that they can understand. Clean data makes the models behave consistently. So when a demand spikes, the model reacts logically. When seasonality appears, it's real. And when the forecasts change, the reason can be explained. So predictability definitely builds trust. Dirty history forces planners to override. When the model behaves erratically because the data is polluted, planners are going to do what they do, and they're going to compensate it manually. Again, they override the forecast. They'll adjust safety stock. They have their own huge spreadsheets with multiple tabs, and they develop and create tribal knowledge. And once overrides become the norm, the model loses its credibility, even if the math is sound. So clean data is the difference between numbers and insight. Executives often ask me why. Why is my forecast wrong? I'm like, the better question is, what story is the data telling the model? If the story is wrong, the forecast will be wrong. If the story is clean, forecast becomes a strategic asset. And planning credibility depends on transparency. When historical data is clean, planners can explain why the model behaved the way it did, what changed in the business, what is the forecast reacting to, and whether should I override is justified in doing it. That transparency is what builds cross-functional team trust. Bottom line, historical data's cleanliness is not a technical exercise. It's a credibility exercise. If the history is clean, the model behaves predictably. If the model behaves predictably, the planners trust it. And when the planners trust it, the entire organization will start making better decisions. And clean data is the foundation of those planning credibility. Period.
Absolutely, Cheryl. That's where my next question is coming up now. So, your most planning model assume a steady state world, right? But in real operations are anything but steady. You
Right.
talked about historical data cleanliness, and it is so critical in the background process. Now, what I wanted to know is, based on your experience, how often do organizations actually simulate the disruptions as part of their planning process?
I laugh, honestly, probably far less than far less often than they should, right? They should be doing this frequently of some sort of cadence and far less often than they think they are doing. So they think they're looking at it, but really in actuality, they're not. Most organizations believe they're planning for disruptions, right? But what they're actually doing is reacting to them. There's a big difference between responding to chaos, which people get really good at, and designing for it. Let me break that down when I see across my manufacturing environments that I saw. Planning cycles are built around steady state assumptions. The default planning model in most ERP assumes that the supplier will deliver on time. And we all know that isn't true. They expect machines to run at expected rates. Well, I've been on a manufacturing floor for well over 35 years, and let me tell you, that ain't true. Labor is available, harder these days. It's really difficult to find labor, more importantly, skilled labor. Quality holds are minimal, right? And demand behaves predictably. But that's not the world we live in when we work in a manufacturing environment. Manufacturing is full of variabilities, and yet the planning logic rarely reflects that. Disruptions are handled manually, not modeled. And when something goes wrong, a supplier delay, a machine breakdown, a demand spike, what happens? Planners do what they do and they jump into action. They expedite, they reschedule, they override, they adjust safety stock, and guess what they do? They rebuild their plan in their own Excel spreadsheet. But none of that behavior is captured in the ERP system. So the system never learns from that disruption, right? And the next cycle repeats the same pain. So over and over again, they're doing the same thing. So scenario planning is an exception, definitely not the norm. Very few organizations can really run a structured simulation. What if the supplier splits by 10 days? What if demand spikes 30%? What if we lose a shift for a week? What if we scrap increases by over 5%? And when do they do these scenarios? They often on-off exercise, not embedded into the planning rhythm. It may come into their Kaizen event or their continuous improvement, but they're not testing it regularly. And these testing cycles don't include disruptive scenarios, right? The UAT script may validate a really great happy path, run MRP, check plan orders, confirm no orders, no errors. Confirm no errors. But they really test supplier availability, right? Suppliers lead times change constantly, especially in today's world right now. The supply chain is still volatile. Capacity constraints, if you've got machines that are going down or you don't have enough machines to run, you got capacity constraints going on. If you've got a high quality issue that took place, I just lost a whole lot, or I scrapped out this material. There's a lot of rush orders. Why? Because you're so far behind, all of a sudden the customer's calling you and I need my parts. And now guess what? That order comes the hottest thing on your plant floor now. Because in theory, whatever customer screams the loudest will get the orders fastest, right?
Yep.
Right. Forecast overrides, partial receipts, production delays. So the system goes live, having never been tested against a real world scenario. That's what Lace Consultant does. We've lived it. We breathed it. We know what it's like to be in a manufacturing plant. I know what happens with supplier variability and machines going down and quality issues. So we work with our clients to test that out, similar to what ImpactQA does. The result, the ERP plans a perfect world, and the planners fixes the real world. This is the core issue, right? The ERP is planning a world where everything goes wonderful. Planners are operating a world where everything always goes wrong. And the gap between those two worlds is where all of the firefighting lives. That's the crux. Bottom line, Sachin, most organizations do not simulate disruption at all. They absorb it. They rely on planners' heroics instead of designing planning logic that anticipates variability. When you start modeling disruptions intentionally, inside the ERP system, stress test it, what ifs, inside the planning parameters, inside your testing cycles, that's when planning becomes resilient instead of reactive, right?
That's right. That's perfectly right, correct, Cheryl. And that's when we, as you were rightly mentioned, right, how impact QHS look at it as a problem statement differently. We talk about disruptions. We don't follow the happy path. We always ask these questions to our customers. What in case of disruptions? We need to write some business scenarios for the disruptions. How do we handle the disruptions in the testing world, right? We do focus on those because everyone focus on the happy path scenarios, but there is a lot of chances wherein the system goes down and that has not been validated or tested thoroughly. So that's what, and the examples which you gave were the real production, real life examples. Those were really insightful. Thank you so much for that. Now, we often treat supply chain and finance as a separate conversation, but as we know that it's a very integrated modules of any ERP system, right? In practice, how often do supply chain planning decisions unintentionally impact financial reporting?
It's funny you asked me that question. We've worked with a client a year ago, and I was hired to come in to fix the supply chain problems, and I spent majority of my time also working with the finance department. So yeah, much more often than people realize.
Yes.
And it's usually in ways that aren't visible until month end, quarter end, or we're doing an inventory, a physical inventory, or we're doing an audit. So supply chain decisions and financial reporting are tightly connected. But in most organizations, those connections are not well understood, nor well governed, and definitely not well tested. Okay, so let me see if I can break this down across some of the ERP environments, right? Every planning decision has a financial consequence. When planners adjust lead times, safety stock, lot size, or production sequencing, They're not just changing the operational behavior, they're changing the finance. They're hitting inventory valuations, cost of goods sold timing, variance absorption, working capital, revenue recognition, write-off exposure. But because these impacts are not immediate and they aren't often visible until finance closes the books or something that finance catches, an inventory is also the biggest silent connector. This is probably where I spend a lot of conversation on when we're fixing problems. Inventory, again, is the biggest silent connector. Most unintentional financial impacts come from your inventory behaviors. Overstated safety stock inflates working capital. Understating your lead times will cause shortages, and I see it all the time, premium freight cost. And then incorrect bombs distort standard costs. Scrap not recorded properly inflates inventory value, and cycle count adjustments hits the P&L completely unexpectedly. So supply chains think they're making operational decisions. Finance sees an unexplained swing completely on their balance sheet. So parameter changes have major ripple effects into the finance. This part probably is the most organizationally underestimated. When someone changes a planning strategy, a lot size, a yield, a routing time, a scrap percentage, a lead time, it doesn't just change your planning, it changes costing, inventory valuation, and financial timing. And because these changes are really documented or governed, finance gets blindsided. And trust me, I've been in line with my CFO many times, having many conversations around these issues. ERP systems don't warn you when planning logic affects the financial logic. ERPs treat planning and finance as completely two separate modules, but the business experiences them as one integrated reality. They are not separate. So when supply chain makes a change that impacts standard cost roll-ups, variance calculations, WIP valuations, overhead absorptions, inventory reevaluations, the system doesn't say, hey, this will hit your P&L, make sure you see. It's just gonna do it. And then you add UAT testing, rarely tests the financial impact. We may get occasionally, once the chart of accounts is set up and the reporting's done, they feel that they're done on their UAT testing. Not with LACE. We I want to say it nicely. We ensure that the financial side of people that are represented are in the beginning stages, because
Correct.
we need everybody on the same team working off the same sheet of music. So I find that sometimes the financial team is too busy to do the UAT testing, so they get what they get. But most test cycles only validate the MRP runs, the planned orders, and maybe the purchase orders and requisitions. But they don't typically know what the decision flows down into your costing, whether you're standard or average or whatever, and how they affect the inventory valuation is a really big issue. And more importantly, how it's going to impact my P&L. So whether variances behave as expected, right? So the system goes live with planning logic, then unintentionally distorts a lot of your financial reporting. So here's what I hear lightly, and you probably hear the same thing, right? The results from the finance and supply chain telling two different stories. Finance will say, inventory is too high, variances are out of control, working capital is spiking. When the supply chain may say, we're just trying to keep the plant running. The systems told us to do it.
Yep.
And we didn't know that this would hit the P&L. I'm a planner, not a finance person. Both are right, because the connection between planning decisions and financial outcomes was never made visible. So, Sachin, so the bottom line, supply chain decisions definitely impact financial reporting every single day,
Right.
and often unintentionally and without visibility until the proverbial hits the fan, right? So
Right.
when planning parameters, master data, and operational behaviors aren't aligned with the financial logic, the organization ends up with clean operational plans and truly messy financial results. And bridging that gap is one of the biggest opportunities for improving both planning credibility and truly financial stability, right?
Yes, you touched on really valid points, which we really do see in day-to-day life, right? Your planners and your financial reporting team working hand in hand is so critical for your project success. In fact, in one of our recent, and you also mentioned about time which financial reporting team or finance team can give in the UAT, and the importance of that time in UAT. I have seen that in my real life experiences, how critical, because they are always busy. They are busy in month-end close activity. They are running the finance businesses, and they need to focus on the running business production before they focus on the UAT. So I do see those challenges in my real life as well. Now, following on that, planners are typically focused on your service level and executions. From your experience, do planning team really understand the downstream FI and financial impact of the decisions they are making every day?
Organizations and a lot that I've worked with, planning teams understand that their decisions matter, right? And it's important what they're making a decision so that they can sell the goods, but they don't fully understand how deeply those decisions ripple into the financial reporting. Typically planners don't even have access to the accounting module, so therefore they won't see it. And it's not because planners aren't capable of understanding it, it's because the connection between planning logic and financial outcomes is really made visible. Some of the things that I've worked with is when I ran my plants, I wanted my finance team to understand how planning and manufacturing and vice versa, so they at least know a little bit. So let me explain. Planners think operationally, right? They're not thinking financially. At least the years that I was a master planner, we focus on keeping the plant running. We need to make sure we have enough inventory. Will production hit the schedule? Are my suppliers delivering my goods on time? Or do I need to have my buyers expedite? But every one of those decisions has a financial shadow behind it. Inventory valuation is huge. Cost of goods sold, timing, hitting your records, variance absorption, working capital, write-off exposures. Planners don't always see that because the ERP doesn't show it to them. They're not seeing those screens. They're not looking at those reports. Again, their number one job is to keep the plant running with the right stuff at the right time. And ERP systems separate planning logic from financial logic. Most ERPs treat planning and finance as two different worlds. Planning lives in MRP, MPS, forecasting, master data. That's what they live in every day. When they go into an ERP system, they're going into their MRPs and they're forecasting their MPSs and they're looking at what the requirements are. Finance doesn't. They live in costing, valuations, general ledgers, balance sheets. But the business experiences them as one integrated reality. So when planning changes a lead time, a lot size, a scrap factor, a routing time, guess what? Financial impact is felt immediately, even if nobody notices it until month end. So parameters change quietly, reshaping your financial outcomes. It's part of the surprise leaders, right? When a planner updates a production lead time, all right, A yield factor, a safety stock, a bond component, a lot size. It's not just changing the plan. It hits standard cost, overhead, inventory. But planners rarely will see the connection because of the ERP system will not and does not warn them. So finance will see the symptoms. They won't see the root cause. They will see that the inventory spiked. They will see variant swings, unexplained COGS, and working capital volatility. But they don't see the planning decisions that triggered those changes. So finance and supply chain end up telling two different stories about the same numbers. And testing cycles do not validate financial impact. As we talked about before, there is a major disconnect becomes the structural issue. UAT only will validate the MRP, the planned orders, POs, etc. But very rarely do they talk about how it impacts costing and inventory, and especially when the financials hit the general ledger and the P&L. So planners will never get exposed to that financial consequences. So the bottom line, most planning teams truly don't fully understand downstream financial impact. Not because they don't care, because a lot of them do care, but because the ERP system doesn't make the connection easily for them to see. And until the organization, human bridges that gap, they'll continue to have operational plans that look clean and the financial results that will look chaotic. And when planning and finance finally speaks the same language, right? They're talking the same information, everything will change. Trust, stability, decision-making will all improve, in my opinion.
Rightly said, yeah. Cheryl. It's a need of an hour, I would say, right? When your planning and finance needs to, as I was explaining, needs to work in hand. Now, as we have discussed, the system can look perfectly healthy while the business struggles, right? It looks technically right, but operationally fails. But when you zoom out and look end to end, what's the real cost of planning outputs that are technically correct but operationally wrong?
Yeah, the cost is big, right? Most organizations don't realize how much damage it causes because the system looks like it's working. That's
Mhm.
what makes the problem so seriously dangerous. When planning outputs are technically correct, but operationally they are not, the ERP system will behave perfectly. It'll run MRP. As we mentioned, it'll generate planned orders. It'll look all wonderful. But the business is living completely in a different reality. So operational chaos behind clean system outputs, yeah. The plan looks beautiful on paper, but the shop floor cannot execute it. Production orders are starting too late. Materials aren't available. Capacity is overpromised. Suppliers aren't meeting the delivery dates. Inventory is in the wrong place or not there at the right time. So the system is right, but the business is really suffering. And planners stop trusting that ERP system. Once a planner realizes the system recommendations don't match reality, they're the first to stop using it. They build again their own spreadsheets. I had a planner who was so proud of a huge workbook with multiple tabs. And she said, I can find anything. Just let me put my spreadsheet up. I almost went, oh my goodness, you're running a whole entire plant on Microsoft Excel. And they override dates, they create tribal knowledge. And the ER becomes a reporting tool, if that, and not a planning tool. So firefighting becomes the operational model. People again I worked with, and they were like, look at me, I'm a super firefighter. I can solve any of these problems, right? Because the plan doesn't reflect real world behavior, they get really good at it. And they're proud of it. They can expedite, they can push, they can split, they call the suppliers, they rebuild the schedule. They're manually adjusting inventory. But none of this activity is done in the ERP system. Financial impacts accumulate quietly and silently. This, again, is a big part where leadership often misses. Operationally wrong planning outputs do drive excess inventory, stockouts, premium freight, overtime, variances, you name it, right? And then what happens? The P&L absorbs the cost long before anyone realizes the root cause is truly a planning logic. So continuous improvement stalls. If a system says everything is fine, but the planners are constantly correcting it, the organization will never see the real problem. You can't improve what you can't see. I've always said to my team, if I have a high quality problem, throw it in the middle of the plant floor. We need to see it. Therefore, then we can figure out what the root problem is. So testing becomes very meaningless if you can't see it. KPIs become misleading, and root cause analysis truly becomes impossible. So leadership, this is why I have Lace Consultant works with leadership teams all the time, right? The biggest thing is leadership gets false sense of stability. Executives are looking at these reports and assuming the plan is sound. Meanwhile, the planners are drowning. They are working hours and hours to try to keep that plant going. It's not healthy and sustainable for them. And then the system says the plan is healthy, but everybody in the company, the plant manager, the buyers, the planners, everybody else knows that that is not what's happening on the floor. So the cost of planning outputs that are technically correct, but operationally wrong is lost trust, lost efficiency, and most importantly, lost money. It creates the illusion of control by eroding planning credibility, operational stability, and truly financial performance. And until planning parameters reflect what the real world behavior is, what that plant is really experiencing, the ERP will continue to generate plans that look great on paper, but truly fail in practice. So I know we've been talking for a while now, and it's getting time to us to start wrapping up. So I want to leave you with these three messages that cut across every ERP platform. And I've been in many, and I've been in many industries, and I've worked with many planning maturity levels. Clean ERP data is not an IT problem. It's a planning credibility problem. We often treat data quality like technical exercise, something for an IT or data analyst team to fix. But the truth is, dirty data destroys your planning credibility. If lead times, bombs, safety stock, demand history don't reflect reality, the ERP will generate plans that look really good, but behave wrong. And once the planner stops trusting the system, everything becomes manual, reactive, and inconsistent. And that is typically the area where I find the most of what department stops putting the data into the system. It's the planning department. And its clean data isn't about system hygiene. It's about enabling the planners to truly trust the logic that will drive their business decisions. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones that have a direct impact to the financials. So testing is where planning assumptions either survive or they fail. Most organizations test transactions, definitely not assumptions. They validate the system runs, but not that plan makes sense. But planning logic lives in all of these assumptions that are built into the planning parameters: lead time, lot size, yield factor, forecast behavior, supplier variability, capacity. If those assumptions aren't tested, they become invisible risks that are truly baked into every ERP run.
Mhm.
Testing isn't a technical checkpoint. It's the moment where you find out whether your planning logic reflects real world or a theoretical one, right? One that truly doesn't exist. In organizations that test planning logic early truly move from firefighting to forecasting. That's what this whole thing is all about. When planning logic is validated early, before go live, before a peak season, before the next interruption, everything changes. Planners stop overriding, operations stop firefighting, finance definitely stops getting surprised, leadership starts questioning the numbers, and the ERP finally becomes the source of truth. Early testing turns planning from reactive to proactive, right? It shifts the organization from chasing problems to truly anticipating them. And that's the difference between surviving variability and truly mastering it. So if you take anything from today's webinar session, and I hope our people that are listening walk away with this one last note: planning credibility isn't built in the tool. It's built in the assumptions you test, the data you trust, and the disciplines you apply. Got those right? Get those right, and your ERP system becomes a strategic asset, and really, instead of a daily battle. So, what do you think?
That's a great message, Cheryl. That's a great message. And as I was explaining earlier when I introduced ImpactQA, right? At ImpactQA, we challenge the norms. We challenge logics, business logics. We, as you rightly mentioned, that testing your assumptions is important. We do challenge those when we go to customers, when we build scenarios. And to bring this to a full circle, I really appreciate all the great insights into planning parameters and forecasting. It was tremendously helpful for all of us. And now, what we have talked about today isn't just supply chain theory or ERP configurations. It's about whether the assumptions driving your plans are visible, governed, and proven in real life. When your planning logic, data, and testing are aligned, ERP stops being something teams work around and starts becoming something they trust, as you rightly mentioned, right? And that's the shift that turns planning from constant firefighting into a confident, scalable decision making. Thank you so much.
Totally agree with you, Sachin. Totally agree. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sachin and Cheryl, for the great insights. We can now move into our Q&A session.
Sure.